stewards with that. I remember I was teaching this in Nigeria a couple of years ago, and some of the students came back the very next time, and they said how much money they are saving in their family because they gave their children, one of the things that I advocate for is an allowance. You put your children on an allowance. And there's a lot of people that say we don't have enough money to put our children on an allowance. And my argument is you will actually save money. So I put my children when they were, I think maybe 5 or 6 and 4, 5 and 3, I think they were 6 and 4 on an allowance. And because they are participants in the family community, they're expected to do chores, they're expected to contribute to the community, they also get a little bit of money. And from that money, they need to tithe, they need to save for something, and then they get 40% is spending money, 10% is tithe, and 50% is saving. So they're learning to save for something. They're also having spending money and they're learning to spend. Well, my son, loves candy and the frozen yogurt when we lived in Ghana. So he would spend his money very quickly. His spending money would be gone within a few days of getting his allowance. Whereas my daughter is very careful with money and would choose to not. And so after a week, my son would say, "Can I have?" And my answer would be, "Where's your money? You have your allowance." "Well, I used it all." "Well, I'm sorry. I guess now you'll have to wait until next month." And so he learned through competition, because both of my children are a little competitive, that he didn't like the fact his sister always had money and he didn't. So he learned to save his money. But actually what we found was that it saved us money as a family because they were controlled in what they could use. And so these other people who did this in Nigeria said that they put their children on an allowance for their scratch cards as well, that they couldn't just burn through the data. They had to learn some of those things as well. So different ways of doing it, but let's talk through this. Why have a budget? A budget acts as a counselor, informing us about our financial situations and goals. The budget gives us an estimate of how we would like our finances to work out over a given period of time. And so it's about being strategic. And some people say that, we just need to trust God, we don't need to budget, but no, it's about being strategic, about being stewards of the resources. What would we like to see happen with our finances? We can create a budget from information partly drawn from experiences of past events, partly from things we know will happen in the future, and partly from our imagination. And those three things are important to keep in mind. So I'm asking you to track your income and expenses. Now that's from the past. But once you see what you have done, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's where you want to be in the future. And it also doesn't include your imagination. So what we did is when we looked at how our money was going, that's when we said, okay, we don't like how much we're spending on food and we want to be a better steward of our resources. So we're going to cut that down. And then that will mean that in the future, we'll have more funds to allocate to A, B, or C. And then our imagination comes in by saying our family goal is to own a house. At that time, we didn't own a house. And so that was our goal. To do that, and that's where the imagination come in. Or you may have a goal of sending your children to university or to whatever your goals might be. But it's not just what happens in the past. It's helping to direct what happens in the future, and then letting some of your dreams, your desires, your imagination come into that. We can use the budget first to guide our day-to-day spending. And secondly, to compare with our income and expenditure records to gain further understanding of our financial management. And so this is the budgeting process, gathering information. And that's what you're doing right now. You're gathering the information. And to be honest, for this course, I actually recommend that people collect this information for 2 to 3 months, partly because 1 month, there may be a lot of anomalies. There may be things that happen that are not normal. And so 2 to 3 months gives you a better picture of what normal is. It also is helping to develop a habit where you begin to figure out how to track your income and your expenses. After you gather the information, now we need to organize it. And that's what we'll be looking at for your assignment that's due next week. And we'll look at that at the end of the session. How do we organize it? How much did I spend on food? How much did we spend as a family on transportation? How much did we actually give to the church? How much, in all of these different categories, what are we spending our money on? But then from that information, now you can prepare a budget. So now you look at, okay, this is what I did. Do I like it? Do I need to change it? Is this the way it's going to be? Where does the future come in? Where do my goals come in? The family goals, or now we can talk about as a church and as a ministry as well. The plan that God has given you as a family, the plan that God has given you as a ministry or as a church, that fits into the budget. You're trying to be stewards of what God is giving to achieve His purposes and His goal. Then the next is you communicate that to the directors that you may have, staff, employees, or to your family, and you talk as a family. This is what we're doing. And so Pastor Emmanuel would say, as he's saying to his children, listen, we're going to cut down the yogurt, not because I'm trying to be mean as a father or I don't love you. It's because we are working on being stewards so that as a family, we can glorify God by doing A, B, and C. And so this is part of that process. And then you develop, implement, and then review the plan. And so that cycle that we talked about the other day, plan, do, review. Making a budget, not that difficult to do. Following through with the budget becomes a little bit more difficult, and then actually reviewing it becomes a challenge, because that's where the discipline comes in. And so that's the process. You're gathering the information, organizing the information, preparing the budget, communicating the budget, and then implementing and reviewing. So budgeting is vision casting. You're casting a vision for the future. And that's where I love to say, that we're moving from duty to delight. It's about vision casting. It's not about restricting you. It's not about putting chains around you. It's about helping you fulfill the call that God has given you as a family and as a ministry. Preparing a budget, both for you and for your organization, are important for responsible, stewardly handling of finances. And so Jesus talks so much about money. The Bible talks so much about money. And so we can't spiritualize it to say, we just trust God. No, He has given it to us, and He has told us to be faithful. We have been given time, treasure, and talent. We need to be stewardly with our time. We need to be stewardly with our talents. And we also need to be stewardly with our treasure. And that means that we have to be thoughtful about it and organized about it and disciplined about it so that we can fulfill what God has given us to fulfill. We start with a personal family budget. And so that's why I'm recommending this for each of you. Start it at home, practice it at home, make mistakes at home, and you will be able to translate that to your church. You will be able to translate that to your ministry. But it will also help you be able to better teach it. If you preach it, you should also practice it. Let budgeting begin to permeate your life. It can mean freedom in many ways. And that is, I'm sure that some of you could give a testimony, maybe Reverend Johnson, Reverend Johnson, let me put you on the spot if you're there still, because I can't see. Does it mean freedom in many ways? When you do a budget, how does freedom come into that? Can you give me a testimony on that?
There is more freedom in it this way. You begin with the end in mind. So if you know how the end is going to be, you have the freedom to do what you want to do. So that's what I do it. You begin with the end in mind. Yeah. You have a chart so that you move towards it. Yeah. And that is the actual freedom.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And so that freedom of fulfilling, what God has given you to do. And for me, it's always been because, so in my budget, I expect my car to break down. And so every month I put a little bit away so that when the car breaks down, I don't have to suddenly be plunged into a crisis. Now, does that restrict me in other areas? Yes, because, and I'm saying I won't touch that. And so that's where some of the freedom comes in. When you are not taking loans, when you are free from the bondage of loans, is critical, because you are no longer in fear of what somebody might come and do and say. You no longer carry that guilt of if you become delinquent. So there is a freedom in that, and that becomes good to say. Reverend Dr. Gaga, you have raised your hand. Go ahead.
Okay, I was also looking maybe a second side of freedom with regards to budgeting. Now, if the family entirely knows what the income is and everybody has an allocation, where does it come that I can do what I want with my income? Where is the freedom of using? Like, I want to surprise my wife with a party or with a gift, but she knows the income, and then I would have to submit a budget for, so how can I buy a surprise gift when I have to submit to the family? Okay, or the children. Thank you. That's the freedom I'm looking at.
That's a funny question, because sometimes my husband will do that. He says, I really want to buy you this. And my response is, yeah, but you don't, I mean, it's our money, so it's not really like it. But here's one way to do that, is to put yourself on an allowance. My parents did that. So my father was extremely tight with money. But they got to a point when my mom started working, and they put themselves, they each had a little allowance that they could use. And from there was something, you know, with the allowance, they didn't have to report to the other spouse how they were using it. But what's funny, my father was an artist, and so he loved to paint. And my mom would always use her money for blessing her children, because she loved to give gifts, and growing up we never got gifts. And so she would use it in that way. And then my father got very frustrated because he felt like we were loving her more than him. And so these are issues that you have to talk through. But that's what I would recommend, is you put yourself, you give yourself as children, you give them an allowance, you give yourself an allowance as well, that you are free to do things with. My husband now likes to have coffee with people, and so he can use his allowance for that. And if he wants to save it up and buy me something, he can do that. But yeah, there is, you know, there are ways to work in freedom within that. So that's a good question.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, one of the main ways to avoid challenges and integrity relating to finances is to live below your means, which relates to contentment. And this is critical as well. So living within your means. So, you know, and I know that some of us have inconsistent salaries, or we're farmers, and so money comes, you know, twice in a year. And so, and I'm talking more to those who have regularity to their streams of income. But living below your means is critical. And so Emmeline this morning gave the example of there was a place that she wanted to move to, but it was going to stress her financially if she moved to that particular place. And so understanding what your income is and then budgeting allows you to say, okay, this is what we have. Let's be realistic about what we can spend. And we will be intentional to live below our means, which means having a bit of a cushion so that we have some other options if we need to. There are three main things that we have. We have needs, we have wants, and we have desires. Our needs we have to have met, but when we look at food, for example, there's so many different levels of food. I can eat rice and beans every day and never have any meat and never have oil, or, you know, things like that. That would be meeting the need. But then I want meat in it. I want some protein in it, and then I desire chocolate or ice cream or sweets or Fanyogo or something like that. And so we have to think about that in terms of our housing, in terms of our clothing, in terms of our entertainment. All of these things we have to assess, and we do have choices that we can make within that. And one of the things that I've told the story about my father, you know, he decided that he was just horrified at the amount of interest he had to pay when he bought his first car. And he hated the fact that the bank was getting this interest just for loaning him the money. And so he sacrificed for one period of a car, and I think it was maybe, I don't know, 12 months or so. And he decided he was going to make the payment to the bank and make a payment to himself, so that the next time when that car broke down and he had to buy a new one, he had saved up enough money. In order to do that, he had to make a sacrifice. And what he said was, I'm just going to eat peanut butter and bread. That's it, for that period of time. And that's what he did. He took it all the way down to what did he need to have in order to survive. And he made that payment to himself. And he never again, for the rest of his life, he made a payment to himself for a car. And he was able to achieve that. Now, he never ate peanut butter again after that period of time. He hated peanut butter. But it's learning to live below your means, which means that you're going to be content. And so learning to accept that this is where I am right now because I have a vision. I have a path that I'm trying to take. It's not keeping up with so-and-so or living like this person, but it's a vision that God has given me for my family, for our future, and that means that we will be content in this. When it comes to family budgeting, there are 3 main rules. Do it together, husband and wife, as well as the children, not just for the planning, but also for the follow-through and accountability. And that's a challenge to do. It's a challenge, not just to set it up, but to do it ongoing. And Reverend Kisala in Kenya, I thought had a great way that he is doing it with his wife, because they had a hard time just tracking their finances and then coming together. So what they did is in the entryway of their home, they put a bowl, they put paper and pens beside that, and as soon as they entered the house, they would just take a second, write down any money they received for the day, any money they spent for the day, what it was for, threw it in the bowl, and then they were done with it. And then once a week, they would go through that bowl, and then they would sort out what we spent on food, what did we spend on on transport and whatnot. And so what that does, a simple method like that, means that you're spending an hour, maximum 2 hours in a week. Is that time you could be doing something else? Yes, but is it an important thing to do in order to help you and your family achieve your goals? Absolutely, and it's a way of being stewardly before God with the treasure that He has entrusted for you. So find a way to do it together, and I really encourage you to bring your children into it. Let them learn to make mistakes at home. Don't wait until they're independent before they begin handling money and making those mistakes. And if you want, write me. I'll give you some resources on financial parenting, which is a passion of mine, so that your children learn very well how to do this when they are young, and then they can be more successful as adults. Second, have a goal. Know that there's something positive that will come because of the discipline. And so, as I shared, for us, our family in the beginning, it was to own a home. And so that was what we were working towards. For your children, especially if you teach them to start saving, have them set a goal that's something that they are saving for, that they would like to have. And so you're building in a positive reinforcement. A lot of budgeting looks negative, but build in a positive reinforcement that will give you the energy to do that. And Freeman, maybe you can share about your piggy banks. When I get to this next one, maybe you can share how that's going. The third is then to keep it simple. Might be more practical and doable in the end. Don't make it too complicated. Don't get too legalistic about it. Understand that there needs to be some flexibility. But find a way that works for you. And what worked for me might not work for you. It might not work for somebody else, but find what works for you. Freeman, do you want to share about your piggy banks? If you're there. All right, I'm not seeing him come up. If he does, I'll give him a chance.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Traditionally in Africa, we grew up knowing that our parents had piggy banks and they encouraged us to have piggy banks. But it was recently that the piggy bank savings scheme made more meaning to me. And so I started with my family, my wife and children. They all have their piggy banks. There's a group of teenagers I teach. We run discipleship class in my house on Sundays. So I got them to get their piggy banks. As I speak with you now, different people, pastors' wives, some of their children, many women, have their piggy banks in my house. They brought their piggy banks because we said we'll be having a piggy bank party at the end of the year. So last year, we had a piggy bank party where all those who kept, some of them said they will be more disciplined if they leave the piggy bank in our house because they were tempted to touch it if it's with them. So that's why. So for me, last year, my generator was already going bad. So one of the things I did was to save towards having a new generator. So the dividend of my piggy bank for December last year was a new generator. Now we're also saving towards other projects, my family and all the others. So by December, we will open our piggy banks, and then January we'll start again. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that. And the interesting thing for Freeman is if you go to his house, I don't know if it's still there, but he has a vision statement and a mission statement for his family that they have put together. And you know, the things that we apply to business, we can apply to our own families, and it helps us to come together to know what it is that we are working on. So thank you for that, Freeman. There's a rule called 50-20-30. So 50% of your income should be for your fixed costs. When you look at doing your budgeting, your fixed costs are things like your rent that you're paying, or mortgage if you're paying on a house, your utilities, the things that you're paying for electricity, for water, and so on. The fixed cost would include a tithe that you give, and so on. And so you want 50% of your income to go for those things. If you're paying more than that, I remember I was working with a woman, and 80% of her income was going for her rent. And that's possible, but it stressed her. It was very difficult for her to live and survive in that way. As Emmeline's auntie said, you won't eat, you'll be hungry. So 50% for fixed costs, 20% should be for financial goals, and that means savings. And that means savings for future things that you're looking at. And that's a lot, but that would be a goal if you were able to do it. And then 30% would be for the flexible costs. That would be like food, clothing, the things that I said that, you know, you can have different tiers of need, want, and desire. You have some flexibility with those things for how you will spend money for that. So as you look at your budget, take a look, do a rough percentage to see how you're doing in that. If your fixed costs are higher than 50%, is there something that you can do? And it may mean making some lifestyle changes. Are you saving, you know, 2% or 1%? That's going to run you into some challenges in terms of any emergencies that you may have. Things that are unplanned for. And so are there anything within the flexible costs that you can reduce, as Pastor Emmanuel said as well, you know, reduce some of the spending leaks that you have in order to be able to increase the other areas. This next slide just gives you a picture of a budget, and I will email you just a Word document today that you can use for a budget. You can use the budget that's in your manual. That's a weekly budget, and I don't feel like it fully pulls out all the different things that we spend on, which is why I like this one. So at the very bottom of this, you see what your total income is. So what is your total income for your family? And write that in there. And then on the left side, you see what your fixed expenses are. And so I remember, so we have there first, tithes and offerings. And I remember sitting down with a woman in Kenya to work on her budget with her, and asked her, you know, what do you give on a monthly basis to the church? And she told me, and, you know, said, you know, she doesn't really have a salary because she owns a business. And so then we went through everything that she's spending, and she realized that she was tithing about 1%. And she was really surprised that she didn't realize the business was paying her as much as it was until she started putting together everything that the business was giving her when she looked at all of the expenses. So first we have our tithes, our offerings, and then you see savings there as an expense. And a lot of people believe that they save what's left over at the end of the month. But the truth is, if you use savings as whatever is left over at the end of the month, there's almost never anything left over at the end of the month, because money will find a way to leak out. And especially in a warm culture where you have a desire to be a blessing to other people, to give in terms of the community and so on. But savings is also something that's important to do for the protection of your family, for the protections of emergencies and so on. And so most people recommend that you have about 3 months of your fixed costs in savings. So putting a little bit aside on a regular basis so that when the generator breaks down, as Freeman said, or whatever it is that you're looking at, that you'll be able to cover those. Next one is education. Again, there's different ranges, right? You can want to send your children to the most expensive school. One of the biggest challenges I see in education is that many people take out loans for school fees. And that's a loan that's used for consumption. And my encouragement for you is you know that school fees will be coming. How can you get ahead of that, even if it's just for 1 semester, so that you don't have to keep taking a loan and throwing money away on interest? You may have to sacrifice for 1 semester. You make 1 payment on the school fee loan, and then you make 1 payment to yourself, but you're trying to get ahead of it so that you don't have to continue to put money on interest. Maybe you have to pay monthly taxes. I don't know. Your rent or your mortgage payment is a fixed payment. Home maintenance, house help if you have somebody helping you in your home, phone, energy, water, and so on. And then you have some at the bottom there that are annual costs. And so you may have car insurance, you may have home insurance or household insurance, health insurance, life insurance. And so you want to take that annual payment, divide it by 12, so that you're making sure that you can cover everything on a monthly basis to be able to pay those annual fees as well. So then you total up all of your fixed expenses on total A there at the bottom. And then we look at the next side, which is now some of your flexible costs. And so in this one, we want to take a look at groceries or food and household supplies. How much, have you been spending? Is this where you want to be? Now, this is, again, where you're more flexible. Eating out. We live in a world where people are eating out more and more and more. There's convenience in that. There's a price that you pay for convenience. How much do you want to spend on that? Laundry, again, different ways that we could do that to make it more expensive or less. The travel that we have, clothing. Again, clothing, many of us don't go clothing shopping every month, but we might do it twice in a year. And so putting something aside so that you're ready to do that will help. Knowing the appliances, maintenance in the house, things like that will break down. And then you have some other things that are considered more flexible. So often we're not as flexible with tithe or offerings, but community contributions, family contributions, giving to the poor, birthdays and anniversaries. That's where now you can say, okay, this is my income. How much am I going to choose to put towards that? Knowing that it might not be needed every month, but it can build towards when we have a funeral or something like that, or when there's a wedding or so on. Birthdays and anniversaries, Christmas, it comes every year. It's not a surprise when it comes. Let's put something aside so that, especially with Christmas, we can actually be cheerful givers. A lot of people don't like December because it's so expensive, and I think Satan's done a wonderful thing with turning Christmas around to be about consumption and giving and debt rather than the celebrating of the gift that we have. But let's do some planning for that so that we can celebrate it. Grooming, recreation, and so on. And that's also where you see pocket money. And so that's Dr. Gaga's question. You can call it pocket money, you can call it an allowance, but you can put money in there so that each spouse can have some freedom to do things that they want to do and have that covered there. So then you total up all of your expenditures on the flexible side and you add that up. And then you add up the total fixed and the flexible expenses. And you put that down there where it says total A plus B. And so you have your total income at the bottom on the left, and then your total expenses. And now you can figure out whether you have a surplus or a deficit. Now, it's not unusual for somebody to go through this and realize that they are operating at a deficit. And that is sometimes why we get ourselves into debt and we take a loan for consumption. You know, but consumption doesn't mean bad. Obviously, school fees are a good and important thing, but can we do it without a loan? Can we somehow get ahead of those things? If you are at a deficit, you're going to have to go back and figure out what do you reduce? And that's often going to be on the flexible side of things. What can I reduce in order to make my budget work? What can I increase my income? That's sometimes an option. Often, if we could, we would. And so it's more likely that we need to decrease some expenses and then set some goals for ourselves to say, okay, if I sacrifice in this area, this is going to be the good thing that comes out of it. And so what I would like for you to do is on Monday, you will finish tracking all of your income and expenses. And then we'll work towards classifying and analyzing some of that. But the goal will be for you to create a budget, hopefully with your family or at least with your spouse, to say this is what our goal is going to be, and then continue tracking so that you can achieve that. Some additional thoughts on budget. Budget is not to be based exactly on the previous month, but an assessment of all other factors and the future. So the budget needs to be based on history and future goals. And so often I have people turning in budgets that are exactly how their tracking was. So let's say in your tracking on food, you spend $82.73. And then in the budget, I see that they put $83 or $82.73. That means that they're not really, so everything is exact. That means they're not really thinking through the budget and what their goals are. And so you want to be able to say, okay, I spent $82.73. Yeah, I think that's fine. Let me just round it to 80 or 85. Or, you know what, I think I can do better than that. I want to work on some other things. I'm going to see if I can bring it down to 75 and put that in. So don't just copy over what you tracked to your budget, but think through, maybe it will be the same number, but make sure that you're thinking through that. This next point is very important. Budget should end with a zero balance. Somebody said the other day, I don't remember who, assign all funds somewhere so that you don't have a miscellaneous column. Miscellaneous columns are dangerous just because there's not a lot of accountability in that. Again,
that was me.
Oh, Emily, okay. You want to bring it down to a zero balance. So if you have, 500 in income, your expenses should be 500. And it doesn't mean you're throwing money away. Obviously, if you have money left over, you're putting it into savings or you're putting into some sort of investment that you want to do. So just make sure that you want to be able to be accountable for everything you have. If you have a miscellaneous column, it's too easy to lose track of that. And so if you need to create a category that's not there, something that you spend on, then create that other category. And then the third thought is, does your budget reflect your goals, mission, vision, and values as a family? There's a saying, show me your spending and I'll tell you what your gods are. As we said the other day, Martin Luther said that there are 3 types of conversions that need to happen: the head, the heart, and the pocketbook. And so looking at your budget, does it reflect your goals, your mission, your vision, and your values as a family? And there's something very important about that, to say that we are being holistic. We are not saying one thing and doing another, but that's where the integrity comes in, the wholeness, the integer of who we are. Which brings in the question about the culture's attitude towards debt. Are there valid reasons to incur debt? We don't have time to have a discussion on that, but that's something to think through. One of the things that are surprising to me is the amount of loans. I think we just did the research in northern Ghana with the 600 businesses, and I think on average people had about 5 loans per family. And so that's a struggle when we're juggling just surviving, and then we also are in debt to somebody. And so those are some things that we need to think through. There are definitely valid reasons to incur debt, but it's also understanding that when we do that, we are enslaved, we are in bondage to some degree to somebody else. So the Bible doesn't prohibit nor encourage debt, but it does say this: the poor are ruled by the rich, and those who borrow are slaves of money lenders. And so we need to be careful. Contentment is the key. Are you living below your means? Do you distinguish biblically between needs and wants? Does the amount of money you have decide which house you have, which car you have, etc.? Or do you consult with God through prayer? And so for some people, it's very difficult to give 10% to the church, to tithe. And we'll talk about tithing next week. For some people, they need to ask the question, though, it's not how much you give, it's how much are you keeping? We have a responsibility to be content, and even if God has blessed us with more, it doesn't mean that consumption is necessarily the way to go. But we need to, the amount of money that we have should not decide the house that we have or the car that we have, but God should be having input into that, the type of clothes that we wear, the way, the way we use our money. Consulting with God and all of these things and understanding contentment is critical. And now I want to cover organizational budgets. All right, so shifting from family budgets now to organizational budgets. And there's a number of different types of budgets that you may have in your church, in your organization. One type of budget is a line item budget. And this detailed budget lists income and expenses, usually with subtitles for various types of income or expenses or by areas of the ministry. Most people have a line item budget, and so you build your budget usually based on last year's budget with incremental adjustments as needed. And so a line item budget would say, okay, for salaries, this is what we have. For benefits, this is what we have. For in the assignments you've been doing, for missions, this is what we have. For utilities, and so on. And so every year you look at that and you say, okay, for next year's budget, how did we do? Did we meet it? Do we need to increase it? Do we need to decrease it? And so on. So that's one type of budget, most common. The next is a summary budget. This shorter budget includes the areas of ministry, but not the sub-accounts. It allocates funds to a board or committee, but does not include the line item detail. This is a budget that you might release to the congregation. So for me in my church, I receive a summary budget. I don't need to know, in fact, I'm not supposed to know what my pastor's salary is, but I do see what all the salaries of the staff of the church are together. I don't need to know for the nursery in the church, for the babies, how much they're spending on Pampers or on food, snacks for the children, but I do want to see what they are doing in summary for the nursery. And so that's a type of budget that you might use to present to the ministry, to the congregation. The next is a zero-based budget, and this is different than a line item budget. And this is one where you begin from scratch, saying, what will we do this year? You kind of throw out the line item, what you've been doing, because sometimes we are paying for things that we should have stopped paying for a long time ago. And so this isn't something you want to do every year. It kind of gets rid of some of the history, which is important. But you are saying, okay, God, we want to have a clean slate before you, start fresh. What do you want us to do this year? And what it does is it gets rid of some ministries that have been dying or should have died because things have a lifetime time, right? We always say that the principles don't change, but the methods might change. And so we have to be willing to look at our methods and reevaluate. Next is a program budget. This looks at the various programs of the church: worship, outreach, pastoral care, education, women's fellowship, etc., and identifies income and expenses for each program. Staff time is allocated to the relevant programs. So this is a different type of budget. It sounds similar to the summary, and in some ways it is, But what this does is it takes your program by program, and so whether you're a ministry or a church, and then you might look at the pastor or the director and say, okay, the pastor spends X amount of time with the worship committee, therefore that percent of his salary is going to be charged to the worship ministry. Outreach, the pastor and the staff spend X percent of their time in the building, the utilities, X percent of the utilities goes to outreach, therefore it's all of that administration or the overhead is split between all the ministries. Why would you have that type of a budget? Well, some churches, some ministries expect the programs to raise their own money. And so sometimes it's difficult to raise money for utilities. Who wants to give a gift for utilities? But when we say it's allocated out, I would like to give for outreach because I have a passion for that. And so therefore, when I give to outreach, outreach is expected to report a certain amount back to the admin to cover some of those other costs. So that's a different type of budget. And then the last one is a narrative budget. This takes a budget and tells a story with words only and a few numbers listing goals, accomplishments, and resources. And actually, our church has been moving more towards this, even more so, because they understand people don't really like numbers. They don't spend a lot of time looking at the numbers, but they do like stories. And so when we are wanting to approve the budget, we tell a story about what outreach has done, what pastoral care has done, what the women's fellowship has done. We give an overall number for what is needed in that ministry, what the accomplishments are, and so on. So those are different types of budgets that you might see, different type of budgets that you might be involved in creating for your church or your organization. An NGO budget will include some variation of the following major categories. Okay, so every budget has income and expenses, whether you're a business, a family, a church. The funds coming in from the NGO fall into this area. Often NGOs will set up several line items under income categories to include different types of income, such as programs, operational expenses, and so on. And I'll go through that in a minute. Expenses are personnel, administration, property and equipment, and then of course programs. So the organizational budget should fulfill the vision of the organization. It's not just an exercise in numbers, and it's the same with your family. It's not just an exercise in numbers. This is where I say the rubber meets the road. We may say that God has given us a vision to do ABC, but God has also then given us the provision to do that. So God will not call you to do something that he hasn't equipped you to do. And so a lot of people will say budgets are just a sign of a lack of faith and we just should trust God. Well, no, actually, it's part of the whole package. If God is calling you to do that, then where is the equipping of that? How do we exercise our strategic plan or fulfill that strategic plan? And the budget is part of that. The budget can be formulated by a finance committee with input from the director and the trustees and board, as well as various ministries. Final approval should be by the board. And so in our church, the process is that the finance committee will take the lead to go to each ministry leader and say, this was your budget from last year. What are you expecting to be different in this next year? What is God saying to you in the women's ministry for what will be different? And then submit that back, and then they'll put together the overall budget, which will be approved by the board or by our council. And then for us, it goes to the church for final approval. You need to decide on a fiscal year. The easiest thing is when your fiscal year is your calendar year, January to December. Some people, our church, for example, has a July to June fiscal year. And some people have other fiscal years as well. You need to look back in order to move forward. You need to look at history in order to know what changes are going to be made and to plan for income and expenses. So this is a sample of a budget for an organization. And one of the things that I want just to note for you is the importance of understanding what happened previously for you to make some, again, looking at the history, unless you're doing a zero, starting over a budget from scratch. But here you can see 4 different columns. You have your current organizational budget, and then you want to see the current year-to-date. YTD is year-to-date actuals. And then you want your previous year's, previous fiscal year budget and the previous fiscal year actuals. And so here are some different types of revenue you might have. This is for an organization, not for a church. But you want to be able to say, okay, this is our budget for this fiscal year. And right now we are in June, so for 5 months, in fact, DML just had their board meeting on Tuesday and we presented 5 months of what our actuals are. And so we took a look at 5 months, we are not quite halfway through the budget year. Where are we at in terms of our income, our revenue as it relates to those 5 months? And then it's always very important. In fact, we have in our financials, we have 2019 there, we have 2018 there, and we have 2017 there, because we just always want to keep an eye on the history. What's changing? Where is it that we have, need to be paying more attention? Where is God opening doors? And so you want to do that for both your revenue as well as for your expenses. To make sure that at this time we should be 5/12 of the way through our budget. And we also understand that there are some expenses, salary is pretty consistent. Insurance you pay once in a month, so you might have that one might be out of alignment in terms of the 5/12 of the way. Travel, meetings, and so on, equipment. But this is an important piece that if you can, it's one of the things we want to take a look at, is if you can see these things, and as a leader, you want to be able to compare some of these numbers. If you don't have any of these numbers, then you just start where you are. But it's an important thing to continue to pay attention to what is happening in different categories as it relates to both income and as it relates to expenses. Just taking, okay, YTD, again, stands for year to date. So just saying that comment there. Oops, and now I've lost. There it is. Yeah, so looking at year to date. And so looking at the actuals versus the budget is critically important. And we'll look at an example of that in just a minute. Here is a church budget. This would be more of a summary or based by program budget. And so here they're saying that this budget represents a 2% increase over last year. You can see they have a missions program, evangelism, pastoral ministries, education ministries. And then at the bottom on the right, you can see a budget summary where they are summarizing how much is for missions, evangelism, all of the different categories together. So you can see the total budget that is there. And often that will be enough for members of the congregation. I don't know how your churches work or how your ministries work for that, but that's often the one that you want to look at. And then including the previous year's amount so people can see where the changes are. If there's no change, that means no new vision has come, which is okay. You can continue doing what God has called you to do. If you see an increase or a decrease, it means that you are looking at scaling up or scaling down in certain areas based on, hopefully, times of prayer and planning. Implementing the budget, planning is easy. Implementing is the challenge. Again, we want to monitor on a monthly basis of the budget versus the actual. We'll look at that in the next slide. There is different types of budgeting, straight line versus liquid budgeting. And most people do a straight line budget, which just means you take, this is the amount for salaries, we divide it by 12, every month should be the same. Liquid budgeting, so like for DML, when we are traveling to Africa, we know that those months, our travel budget is going to be more expensive than the months when we are in the US. And so a liquid budget would say, we're going to divide it based on quarters so that it doesn't look like we are way off. But for most people, we just do straight line, and when there's an anomaly, we can look at that to say, all right, this was the reason for why there's a variation. This next one, though, budgetary safeguards, is important. Establish authority for unplanned expenses that exceed budgetary amounts. What happens when you've approved a budget and now you come on something that needs spending that is exceeding what the approved budget have? What do you do in terms of that? And we'll look at that, a budget resolution for that. And so this is an example of a budget where we are looking at the actuals. And so what I want you to just pay attention to in this is on the left is income and expenses. On the far right is the percent of the budget. All right, and so this is at 10 months. So this is October. So we are 10 months through the 12 months, which should mean that we're 80% plus, right, through our way through this. And so we can see here, advocacy forum fees, the budget is at 100%, no problem there. The next one though, basic business skills training fees, 28% by the end of October. Now, hopefully we noticed this before October, but that's where I would want to look at this to say, why are we so far behind? This is where as a manager, you are taking what the bookkeeping is telling you to say, what is the problem here? Is it because we're expecting a big November, December? Is it because, you know, what are the reasons for why we're only at 28%? Donations at 85%, pretty much on target there. Products 122%. Okay, we sold more products than we expected. Why is that? And then you can look at expenses the same way. Special events, 93%. General expenses, 106%. And that's only at 10 months. Why is that? And actually, when we looked at that, we realized that general expenses was too broad of a category. We were putting things in there that didn't actually belong there. And so we had to sort that out and so on. But that's just an example of why it's so important to look at the actuals and then to look at your total percent for where you are in the course of the year. And so every month you can be looking at that. And again, if you're way over, you may be a very good explanation. If you're way under, maybe a very good explanation. But if there isn't, then it's something that tells you as a manager or leader to say, we need to pay attention to this and go a little further. And so I want to just talk about the budget resolution. The treasurer, if you do have to go over, then there should be a resolution, a permission that's given. So for you as a leader, what happens if we've approved the budget, X amount for building maintenance, and then your generator breaks down? What do you as the leader have the right to do before going back to your board of directors? So this could be a resolution that you write that says this: the treasurer is authorized to disperse funds in accordance with the annual budget as approved by the ministry team leaders or their designates. In the event of an unplanned or unbudgeted financial need, approval of these additional expenditures is required as follows. The ministry team leader can go up to 1% of their line item over the budget. So the treasurer is allowed to fulfill the budget, right? The ministry team leader can only go 1%, or you could choose what it is, over their budget. So let's say I'm the women's ministry leader, or better yet, let's say I'm the business leader for the business ministry leader in my church. And my budget is some amount. I'm allowed to go 1% over that without getting permission. If I want to go higher than that though, I need for 3 to 5%, I need to go to the treasurer as well. So the treasurer and myself, we can sit down and talk about it and make that decision. But if I want to go over 5%, then it has to go to the board. Now this is just a sample. You could write it how you want. You can write the system of how you want. But the important thing is once you set a budget, you also need to instruct what happens in the case of wanting to go over the budget. Obviously, you don't need permission to go under the budget, but going over, there needs to be a protocol and procedure for that. So you need to compare the budget versus the actual. If it's the same, great. If it's not, it's a variance. Is the variance permanent or is it temporary? Is an adjustment needed? And same with your family. You might look at the budget and Pastor Emmanuel, you were saying that you've been going over and just kind of adding to that. It may be that the budget number is wrong, and so you may need to change the budget. more likely it could be that your spending is not correct. And so that's where you can readjust your spending. And so that's where you look at the variance. And again, your plan, do, review, plan, do, review. You have to review what's the reason for the variance and where does the adjustment need to happen. So what are the challenges you face or might face relating to a family budget? What have you done that's worked, not worked? How can you encourage your spouse and wife, your spouse and your children to join? We already had that discussion, and so we're not going to have that now. But now I want to just go through your assignment for next week. So you've been tracking your income and expenses. And so this is what you've been doing, and this is on page 28 in your DAI, your Integrity and Finance Handbook. You had a starting balance. I'm assuming you started with some cash for your family, and then you started just recording your expenses. And so in the Excel document that I gave you, this looks like this. So from May 25 to June 24 was where I was asking you to, oh, I think, and Freeman pointed out, it's actually June 22. I didn't change that on this. So we're stopping this on Monday. I think you started earlier as well. I think it was May 23 to June 22. You've just been keeping track of it, and that's all that you've been asked to do at this time, and Monday will be the end of that. Now, after Monday, what I would like for you to do is now to do what we call the classifying of that. And so you can see here is an example of some additional, some categories of expenses. And again, everybody's categories are going to be different. Most people, though, will have a category of transport. Most people will have a category of food and so on, and clothing. And so what we want you to do is, on the left-hand side is what you've been doing. So let's say on May 29, I spent $38.22 on food. I have my running balance there. Now I need to take that item and put it into the food column. All right. Then on May 31, I took a bus and I spent $1.29 on that. I have my balance has been reduced by that amount, and now I put that amount into the transport column. And so you have these columns on the right-hand side: transport, food, housing, clothes, tithe, education, offerings, phone, giving, others. Again, make the categories based on your own transactions. But the idea now is to start classifying them. So everything that's food, you just move it over from that line into the food budget. For transportation, from the line that it happened into the transport budget, and so on. So that's something that you now begin classifying. Once you have finished that, now you can move towards an analysis sheet, which you can use for multiple months. So you don't really need to do this one as part of your assignment. This is the third tab, though, in your Excel document that I sent you. And what this does is that now you take, for May, how much income did you have, depending on how you classify your income, and then how much did you spend on transport. So that would just be really adding in those line items that you just added, entered in. So going back, once you add up all your transportation, or put in all the transportation that you used, you add up the total at the end of that month. All the food, add up the total, housing, tithing, and so on, and now you transfer those totals to this page. And the nice thing for this is that when you finish June, you can put June there as well. When you finish July, you can put July there. And that's, you're going to be able to begin tracking how are we doing on each of these categories month to month. And you'll see some variations, right? You'll have some months where certain things will be higher than others, and some where they're pretty steady. The last thing then that you need to do, so the fourth tab, is to create an income and expenditure account. In the business world, we call that an income statement. And so here you are writing essentially an income statement. You have your income at the top, the different types of income, total income, and then you have your different expenditures. What exactly did you spend things on, your total expenses, and then you show your income minus your expenses. Gives you your balance. And so in this particular example, which is on page 75 in your book, you can see that the person spent more than their income. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. My guess is they had income that they were starting with. Maybe they had received money, you know, shortly before the end of the last month, and so they started this new month with a healthy balance. But it would be a question to ask, why did we spend more than we brought in? We probably need to make some adjustments there. We can see food spending is higher than rent. That's a good amount on food. Almost 50% of their budget was on food. And so that would be a question that I would want to ask. You know, what caused that? Is that above your budget? Maybe it was Christmas. And so actually we see this is November, oh, this is 3 months, November, December, January. And so December tends to be a high month for food, and so that could be the variation that was there. But that's the kind of thing that we want you to take a look at. And so the fourth tab in your Excel document is where you will enter in your income and expenses for that period that you were tracking. And I know it wasn't a perfect month in terms of the dates. It wasn't May 1 to May 30, May 31st. So you enter in for the ones that you tracked. And then go from there. Okay, so a question, income and expenditure account is just income and expenditures, no cash brought forward. Yes, so the income and expenditure account, so this summary doesn't include your cash brought forward, except at the bottom, you can see that you had a cash balance on this one. You can enter in what your cash balance was at the beginning of the date of when you recorded. So as of May 31st or 21st, I mean, this was a cash balance, and then you had excess of income over expenditure, and then what your new cash balance is goes to the next one. Typically though, in an income statement, you don't. It's just for what happened during that month. It doesn't include the amount that you're coming in or going out with. Let me, so the steps are as follows. Track your income and expenses, which you are hopefully doing. Classify them on your income and expenditure worksheet. So now all the food, you put in the food column, all the transport and so on. Then add it up, your totals. How much did I spend in each of those areas? Make your summary. And then put it on the income and expenditure summary or the income statement. And then look at your budget. Now, what is it you want to do with your budget? And then in the future, you'll compare back and forth to those. So I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and just open up